Audiobook Top, your new home for the finest selection of audiobooks available anywhere.
Imagine, for a moment, that you are given a diagnosis. A clear, undeniable truth: 1 year. 12 short months remain, no more, no less. Just 1 year left to breathe, to see, to feel. What would you do with that year? What would you change? What long-held dreams, what quiet desperations would suddenly roar to life, demanding to be acknowledged? Would you continue along the well-worn path, the comfortable rut you've carved for yourself, or would every single thing shatter, forcing a radical, terrifying, exhilarating reinvention? For many, perhaps for most, this question remains a terrifying what-if, a hypothetical storm on a distant horizon. But what if you were already living as if you had no time at all? What if, despite the steady beat of your heart and the warmth of your breath, you were merely a shadow, a whisper, a living ghost haunting the periphery of your own existence? This isn't about dying, it's about never having truly lived. It's about drifting through days, through years, defined by the expectations of others, by the invisible chains of habit and fear. It's about watching the world happen around you, a silent, unacknowledged observer in the grand drama of life, yearning for a part, any part, but too afraid to step onto the stage. Picture a life meticulously curated not by desire, but by duty, a life of quiet obedience, where every personal spark is meticulously snuffed out before it can become a flame. This, dear listener, is the existence of Valancy Stirling. For 29 years, Valancy has been precisely that: a living ghost. Invisible, unremarkable, a spinster by societal decree before she even had a chance to bloom. Hemmed in by a family whose love is a suffocating blanket, whose expectations are a cage gilded with tradition. She is to all outward appearances a timid mouse. Small, easily overlooked, content to nibble at the crumbs of life left for her, never daring to claim the feast. But what happens when even a mouse is cornered? What happens when the weight of that unlived life, that suffocating quiet, becomes too much to bear? What happens when the impossible question, if you had 1 year to live, would you change everything, ceases to be hypothetical and becomes a stark, undeniable reality for someone like Valancy? The timid mouse, pushed to the absolute brink, discovers something astonishing within herself, a strength she never knew she possessed, a defiance that begins as a tremor and soon erupts into a roar. Prepare yourselves, for you are about to witness the impossible. You are about to witness the slow, deliberate, breathtaking transformation of a living ghost into a woman fully, vibrantly, terrifyingly alive. A woman who, given a single year, decides to roar. Welcome, dear listener, to a journey unlike any other, a voyage into the heart of a story that, for too long, has lingered in the gentle shade of its more famous siblings. I am your guide, and it is my immense pleasure to invite you now into the enchanting, often surprising, world of L.M. Montgomery's truly underrated classic *, The Blue Castle *. Forget what you think you know about quiet lives and conventional endings, for this is a tale that blossoms with unexpected courage and defiant joy. To truly appreciate the transformation that awaits us, we must first understand the ground from which our heroine springs. Picture, if you will, the village of Deerwood, a place steeped in convention, bound by unspoken rules, where every breath is measured and every joy meticulously dissected. It is a world governed by the exacting Stirling family, where reputation is paramount and individual expression is often stifled beneath a suffocating blanket of propriety. Here, society is a rigid, unforgiving structure, its walls built high with judgment, its windows offering only narrow, prescribed views of existence. For many, Deerwood feels less like a home and more like a well-appointed prison, its beauty shadowed by an almost palpable sense of duty and dread. But beyond the suffocating confines of Deerwood, a different world beckons, a world whispered of in dreams, felt in the rustle of leaves and the call of the wild. Imagine the untamed beauty of Muskoka, the shimmering lakes reflecting an endless sky, the ancient pines standing sentinel over granite shores, the very air alive with the scent of pine and water, promising freedom, solitude, and the wild, unburdened heart of nature. This is a place where the soul can breathe, where the rigid lines of society blur into the soft contours of the wilderness, and where the heart finds a quiet, profound peace. This stark contrast between the stifling village and the liberating wilderness is not just geographical, it is the very essence of the yearning that pulses at the heart of our story. And it is this yearning, this profound human need for escape from the crushing weight of the mundane, that gives rise to our central metaphor, the Blue Castle. This isn't a physical edifice of stone and mortar, but rather a secret, cherished sanctuary of the mind. For those trapped by circumstance, isolated by misunderstanding, or simply aching for a world more vibrant than the one they inhabit, the Blue Castle becomes a mental refuge. It is a place where the lonely heart can retreat, unfurl its deepest desires, and live out imagined adventures. It is a fortress of dreams, built from the gossamer threads of hope and the vivid pigments of an unfettered imagination, offering solace and strength to those who dare to dream beyond their dreary realities. It is where true selves reside, untouched by the world's harsh judgments, patiently waiting for the chance to break free. So prepare yourself, for we are about to step into a narrative where the rigid dictates of Deerwood clash with the wild spirit of Muskoka, and where one brave soul dares to unlock the doors of her own blue castle, transforming not only her life, but the very definition of happiness itself. Chapter 1. The Dossier of Ugliness. It was Valancy Stirling's 29th birthday, and she faced it with the grim resignation of a prisoner contemplating a life sentence. Another year had passed, another milestone reached, not with celebration, but with a renewed, sharpened awareness of her own perceived inadequacies. 29. The number echoed in the barren chambers of her heart like a death knell for dreams long cherished, now undeniably expired. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, what her family thought of her, and worse, what she had come to believe about herself. She was, to her own critical eye, a creature of lamentable plainness. Not outright ugly, perhaps, but certainly lacking any spark of charm or grace. Her hair, a nondescript brown, had never managed to achieve the fashionable wave or curl. It simply existed. Her eyes, often described as nice by those striving for politeness, held no captivating depth, no mischievous gleam. Her figure, an unremarkably slight thing, seemed designed solely for function, never for adornment. And at 29, the dreaded epithet loomed large *, old maid *. It was a word that felt less like a description and more like a brand, searing itself onto her very soul, consigning her to a future devoid of affection, companionship, or even simple regard. The Stirling clan, her formidable family, had long since perfected the art of subtle, yet devastating, disapproval. Valancy's mother, a woman of impeccable standards and an equally impeccable ability to identify flaws, saw Valancy as an ongoing disappointment, a permanent stain on the family's otherwise spotless reputation for conventional success. Aunt Isabel, with her piercing gaze and even sharper tongue, offered unsolicited critiques on everything from Valancy's posture to her pathetic lack of suitors. Cousin Stickles, a man whose sole contribution to any conversation was a smug, knowing silence, embodied the collective judgment. In their presence, Valancy felt herself shrink, her voice muted, her very being diminished to an irritating inconvenience. Their world was one of stern pronouncements, rigid expectations, and an unspoken competition of superiority, in which Valancy perpetually came last. Yet, beneath this outwardly subdued, fear-ridden exterior, within the quiet sanctuary of her mind, bloomed a vibrant, defiant garden. There, Valancy was not the plain, silent girl, but a heroine of her own making, living a life rich with adventure and romance. She built castles in the air, not of stone and mortar, but of courage and passion. She wandered through sun-dappled forests with brave knights, danced in grand ballrooms with dashing strangers, and solved ancient mysteries with a cunning wit. In this secret realm, her eyes sparkled, her hair cascaded in glorious waves, and her voice, when she chose to use it, commanded attention and respect. It was a world woven from the threads of countless novels, of poetry devoured in secret, of dreams she dared not utter aloud. But the harsh, unyielding light of her 29th birthday, and the cold, judgmental eyes of her family, brutally pulled her back from these cherished illusions, reminding her, with a cruel precision, that her reality was merely a drab, unfurnished room, while her imagination remained the only blue castle she would ever truly inhabit. Chapter 2. The family dinner. The heavy oak table groaned under the weight of an equally heavy atmosphere that evening, a familiar oppressiveness settling over Valancy like a shroud woven from disapproving glances and tightly pursed lips. The clinking of cutlery, the hushed murmur of conversation that always seemed to pivot back to her own perceived deficiencies, created a symphony of judgment that had played for as long as she could remember. Tonight was no different, only perhaps the notes were a little sharper, the harmony a little more discordant. Still not a whisper of a prospect, Valancy. Aunt Alberta's voice, though pitched low, carried across the polished mahogany, cutting through the clatter. "You're nearly 30 now, dear. Time marches on, you know." "It truly does." Valancy felt the familiar tightening in her chest, a knot of shame and resentment that had been tied so many times before it was now almost a permanent fixture. Her mind, usually so fertile with dreams and imaginings, offered no clever retort, no cutting comeback. It merely recoiled, shrinking inward as it always did under the glare of their expectations. She merely murmured a vague, noncommittal sound, her gaze fixed on the pattern of the tablecloth. What was there to say? To declare she didn't care for marriage to a family who saw it as the sole measure of a woman's worth would be heresy. To confess her silent yearnings for something more, something undefined, would invite only pity and further criticism. "And how is your reading coming along, Valancy?" Uncle Benjamin chimed in, his tone dripping with an unacknowledged sarcasm that made the compliment feel more like an accusation. "Still poring over those fantastical tales, are you? It's all very well, I suppose, but one does hope for a bit of practical application eventually. A young woman of your age needs a useful pursuit." Each word was a tiny needle prick, a subtle erosion of her already fragile confidence. She felt her cheeks flush, not with anger, but with the weary embarrassment of being so thoroughly understood, yet so completely misunderstood. Her love for stories, her only solace, was reduced to a frivolous waste of time, another failing in their ledger. She longed to shout that these stories were her lifeblood, her escape, her only real joy, but the words felt trapped behind a wall of years of conditioning. The ingrained habit of silence, of submission, held her fast. To speak would be to invite argument, to invite being lectured, and the sheer exhaustion of it all was too much to contemplate. "Valancy, dear, you're not eating your roast," Aunt Alberta observed, her gaze sweeping over Valancy's plate, then lingering on Valancy herself. "You're looking rather pale these days. Not sickly, I hope. It wouldn't do for you to be sickly. We have enough ailments in the family as it is. A touch more color, a little more vivacity, would do wonders." The unspoken comparison to her cousins, who were vibrant and lively, who had husbands or promising prospects, hung in the air like an invisible shroud. Valancy felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and less substantial under the weight of their scrutiny. Every aspect of her being, from her unchosen solitude to her quiet hobbies, even the very hue of her skin, was meticulously examined and found wanting. The constant stream of observations, disguised as concern, was a form of slow, emotional suffocation. It wasn't overt cruelty, but a relentless, draining pressure that left her breathless, constantly reminding her that she was not enough, would never be enough, in their eyes. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to finally break free from this suffocating web of judgment, but the impulse died as quickly as it arose. Her voice, so often stifled, remained so. The familiar, crushing weight of their expectations pressed down, silencing her, leaving her to endure the family dinner, just as she had endured every other in quiet, despairing resignation. Chapter 3. The pain in the chest Valancy Stirling had long suffered in silence, the sharp, clutching pain in her chest a dreadful secret. It would seize her, stealing her breath and chilling her heart with a terror she dared not voice. For years she'd endured, rationalizing it as nerves or indigestion, anything but the truth. But the episodes grew more frequent, more intense, an icy hand tightening around her life. This gnawing fear finally outweighed her lifelong dread of family disapproval, prompting a desperate, unprecedented decision. One Tuesday morning, under the thin guise of a shopping trip, Valancy embarked on an act of rebellion that made her physically tremble. She was going to see Dr. Trent, not the family physician, but a specialist known for his quiet competence. The mere thought of consulting a doctor without a chorus of family counsel was sacrilegious in the Stirling household. Every step away from the suffocating confines of her home felt like a perilous journey. The possibility of discovery, of facing her mother's indignation or Aunt Hilda's scorn, was a constant, sharp sting of anxiety. Yet, the pain in her chest, a colder, more insistent fear, propelled her forward. Dr. Trent's office was quiet, sparsely furnished, a sanctuary from the judgment she expected elsewhere. When he finally called her name, Valancy felt a peculiar mix of relief and dread. The examination was thorough, his questions precise, his gaze unreadable. Then came the words, delivered with a gentle gravity that only deepened their impact. "Miss Stirling," he began, his voice calm, "you are suffering from angina pectoris. It's a serious condition." Valancy managed to whisper, "How serious, Dr. Trent?" He paused, looking at her with genuine compassion. "In your case, I'm afraid, quite serious. I estimate you have, perhaps, a year, Miss Stirling, no more than a year." The words hung in the air, a death knell. A year, 12 months. 365 days. Valancy felt a strange detachment, as if watching herself from afar. The anxiety of her clandestine visit, the fear of family reprimand, suddenly seemed utterly trivial. A year. It was a brutal sentence, yet paradoxically, it felt like a key, unlocking a door she hadn't known existed. The stifling weight of her old life, the ceaseless demand to conform, evaporated in the face of this absolute, unyielding truth. She walked out of Dr. Trent's office, a woman condemned, yes, but also, in a profound and terrifying way, utterly free. The world outside, the familiar streets of Deerwood, suddenly vibrated with a startling, brilliant clarity she had never perceived before. Chapter 4. The death of fear. The doctor's words hung in the sterile air, a pronouncement that should have shattered Valancy's world, yet instead it built it anew. 6 months, perhaps a year at most. A death sentence, yes, but for Valancy Stirling it was a liberation. It was the moment the cage door, which she hadn't even known was locked, swung wide open. The profound, terrifying truth of her mortality, once a distant, abstract dread, now settled in her bones, tangible and undeniable. And with it came an astonishing, bewildering paradox. Knowing she would die finally made her want to live. For 29 years she had existed, not lived, paralyzed by a nameless fear, a suffocating apprehension of life itself. She had feared judgment, failure, loneliness, and the crushing weight of expectation from her formidable Stirling clan. She had feared living wrong. But what fear could possibly remain when the ultimate fear, death, had now been confirmed as her imminent reality? The worst had happened. The future, which she had always viewed with a blend of anxiety and weary resignation, was now sharply defined, limited, and exquisitely precious. If she had only months, then every breath, every moment, every desire she had ever suppressed took on a desperate, vibrant urgency. This wasn't a time for meek endurance. It was a time for furious, unbridled living. The immediate shedding of her lifelong social anxiety was nothing short of miraculous. It wasn't a gradual process, but an instantaneous, almost violent severance. The suffocating cloak of apprehension, woven from 1,000 imagined criticisms and the dread of offending, simply fell away. Her perpetual blush, her downcast gaze, her stammering replies, all the hallmarks of Valancy Stirling, the timid old maid, dissolved like mist in sunlight. What did it matter now if she spoke her mind? What did it matter if she made a fool of herself? What did it matter what anyone thought of her when her very existence was ticking away? The world, which had always seemed a stern, watchful audience, became a canvas upon which she could paint whatever she wished, without fear of judgment from its fleeting observers. And then came the exhilarating realization, sharper than any physician's scalpel, the Stirling clan could no longer hurt her. Their withering glances, their barbed comments, their suffocating control, their endless stream of demands and unwritten rules, all of it had held her captive for decades. They were the architects of her fear, the jailers of her spirit. But now their power was utterly, irrevocably broken. They were small, distant figures, their pronouncements no more consequential than the buzzing of a fly. Their opinions, once her everything, now meant absolutely nothing. She saw them, not as the formidable giants who had always dictated her every breath, but as noisy, harmless children, unable to touch the burgeoning, defiant freedom stirring within her soul. The fear was dead, and in its place, a fierce, exhilarating joy began to bloom. Chapter 5. Truth to power. The sun, usually an unwelcome intruder into the drab, sun-starved dining room of the Stirling household, seemed to shine a little brighter that morning for Valancy. A profound shift had occurred within her, a seismic tremor that had shattered the foundations of her lifelong meekness. The woman who sat down at the breakfast table that day was outwardly the same Valancy Stirling, but inwardly, a silent revolution had begun. She had faced her own mortality, and in doing so, had found the courage to truly live. The usual breakfast ritual commenced. Aunt Stickles, a formidable matriarch whose gaze could curdle milk, presided over the porridge. Uncle James grumbled behind his newspaper, and Cousin Olive picked fastidiously at her toast. For 29 years, Valancy had navigated this minefield of unspoken expectations and subtle slights, a gray mouse scurrying through a world of unyielding giants. But not today. Valancy, your porridge, Aunt Stickles declared, pushing the bowl across the table with an air of absolute finality. It was thick, lumpy, and to Valancy, tasted of dread and duty. For nearly 3 decades, she had swallowed it, along with every other unpalatable aspect of her life. A quiet rebellion, no less potent for its stillness, now stirred in her soul. Valancy looked at the bowl, then, shockingly, she looked directly at her aunt, her usually downcast eyes holding a new, unblinking resolve. "No, thank you, Aunt Stickles," she said, her voice, usually a whisper, surprisingly clear and steady. The simple words hung in the air, heavier than any grand pronouncement. Aunt Stickles froze, her hand still hovering over the porridge pot. Uncle James lowered his newspaper, spectacles slipping down his nose. Cousin Olive stopped chewing, her jaw slack. A collective gasp, though unspoken, rippled around the table. They stared at Valancy as if she had suddenly grown a second head, or perhaps uttered some forgotten ancient curse. Their mouse had not just squeaked, it had dared to roar, however softly. "What did you say, Valancy?" Aunt Stickles managed at last, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I said no thank you," Valancy repeated, meeting her aunt's icy stare without flinching. "I don't care for porridge." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. The Stirlings were utterly dumbfounded. This was Valancy, the timid, the agreeable, the perpetually apologetic Valancy. The girl who never had an opinion, never expressed a preference, never, ever, contradicted. Their world, built on her subservience, had just tilted on its axis. Uncle James sputtered, attempting to find words, but none. Olive merely gaped, a piece of toast forgotten in her hand. For Valancy, however, a glorious, intoxicating wave of liberation washed over her. It was a sensation unlike anything she had ever known. The simple act of speaking her truth, of refusing something she despised, felt like shedding a suffocating skin that had bound her for 29 years. There was a thrill, a dizzying sense of power in setting her own boundaries, in claiming a sliver of her own existence. After a lifetime of shrinking, of accommodating, of silently enduring, she had finally stood her ground. It was a moment of profound, exhilarating freedom, the first taste of a life truly lived, and it was, in its quiet defiance, utterly magnificent. The blue castle of her dreams was beginning to take shape, brick by precious brick, right here in the heart of her dreaded home. Chapter 6. The funeral of a reputation. Valancy's transformation wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, steady blooming. Her death sentence, instead of extinguishing her, ignited something fierce and vital within. The first manifestation of this newfound spirit was her audacious defiance of Deerwood's unwritten laws. She began to wander, alone, into the deep, wild woods that bordered the Barringtons' neat, manicured property. Before, such an act would have been unthinkable. But now, Valancy reveled in it, slipping away after chores, a borrowed book tucked under her arm. Here, amidst the rustle of leaves and dappled sunlight, she was simply Valancy, a soul unbound, discovering her own vast kingdom. The world outside, with its whispers and censorious glances, seemed a distant hum she no longer felt compelled to heed. This inner liberation extended far beyond her woodland adventures, altering the very fabric of her demeanor. The Valancy of old had been a creature of constant apologies, a hesitant shadow. Now, that reflexive "I'm sorry" died on her tongue, replaced by a quiet, unyielding self-possession. When her Aunt Mildred fixed her with disapproval, or her mother launched into a monologue about proper conduct, Valancy no longer cringed. She would simply listen, her gaze steady, occasionally offering a calm response, or sometimes no response at all. Her silence was no longer timidity, but a refusal to engage. She wouldn't apologize for reading a novel when she should be mending, nor for enjoying a sunset when she ought to be preparing chores. The suffocating need for validation had evaporated. She existed, and that was apology enough. The burden of guilt, that heavy cloak, had fallen away, leaving her astonishingly light. Early Deerwood, that bastion of propriety, could not remain oblivious. Her solitary ramblings, her new quiet defiance, her contented independence were anomalies. The whispers began subtly, like leaves before a storm. Soon, they grew into a steady hum. "Have you seen Valancy lately? She's quite changed. So unfeminine, traipsing about like that, and not a care in the world for what people think." This phrase, the cornerstone of Deerwood society, Valancy was now dismantling. But here was the true marvel. Valancy found it utterly amusing. She would catch snippets of conversations, see the conspiratorial glances, the pursed lips. Instead of the crushing humiliation she would once have felt, a small, private smile would play on her lips. It was as if she were an anthropologist observing a peculiar tribe, utterly fascinated. Their judgment, once a formidable dragon, had shrunk to a bothersome fly. Her reputation, the careful edifice built on decades of timid conformity, was indeed dying a slow, public death. And Valancy, liberated from its suffocating confines, was dancing on its grave, finding joy and freedom in every scandalous step. The old Valancy was gone, and with her, the fear of Deerwood's disapproval. She had buried her reputation, and felt only the sweet release of freedom, the exhilarating lightness of being truly herself at last. Chapter 7. Roaring Able. Valancy, having made her declaration of independence, swiftly acted upon it. Her choice of employment, however, was not merely unconventional, it was, in the Stirlings' eyes, an unspeakable disgrace. She would be housekeeper for Abel Heath, Roaring Abel, whose notoriety as a drunkard and brawler painted him as everything low and common, a man utterly beneath their notice, let alone their association. But Abel Heath had a daughter, Cussy, a fragile wisp of a girl, wasting away with consumption. Her mother long gone, Cussy was left to her volatile father and the inevitable neglect of his dissipation. Cussy was dying slowly, painfully alone, in a house reflecting the chaos of her father's life. It was a place Valancy had never imagined, yet it called to a nascent compassion her family had never allowed to bloom. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Blue Castle, less from concern for Valancy and more for the perceived stain on the family name. Aunt Isabel nearly swooned. Uncle James turned apoplectic. Cousin Stickles declared it an outrage. A Stirling Aunt Isabel gasped, "Working for Roaring Abel! The disgrace! What will people say asterisk? It's beyond the pale!" They railed and pleaded, threatened and cajoled, painting vivid pictures of squalor and social abyss. They could not fathom her motive, could not comprehend that Valancy found more dignity in honest labor for a man of ill repute than in the parasitic idleness of her esteemed home. But Valancy, for the first time, was impervious to their condemnations. Their words, once shackles, now drifted harmlessly. This was her decision, and it was hers alone. And so Valancy Stirling stepped out of the stifling gentility and into the rough reality of Abel Heath's ramshackle dwelling. The house was worse than any warning, a testament to years of neglect, grime, and despair. Dust motes danced in the sparse sunlight, revealing layers of filth. The air hung thick with sickness and poverty, punctuated by decay. But Valancy did not flinch. She surveyed the scene with quiet, determined resolve. This was a purpose. She rolled up her sleeves and began. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, attacked the greasy stove, aired out rooms, laundered forgotten bedding, and cooked simple, nourishing meals, their aroma slowly replacing the pervasive staleness. Most importantly, she tended to Cussy. The girl was skeletal, eyes enormous, resignation etched on her face. Valancy spoke softly, gently, bathing her fevered brow, arranging pillows, reading from a worn Bible. She brought order, cleanliness, and crucially, a human presence missing from Cussy's lonely days. Valancy, deemed useless and awkward by her family, moved through the squalor with effortless grace, her competence shining. She brought not just a cleaner house, but peace, dignity, to two lives on the brink. Here, in the heart of what her family called disgrace, Valancy found herself, her strength, and a compassion she never knew she possessed. Chapter 8. The nurse of warning. A cloud of illness, thick and suffocating, descended upon the little house where Cussy lay. It was no mere chill, no passing indisposition, but a grim, relentless malady that gripped her frail body with a terrifying tenacity. Fever ran high, her breath came in ragged gasps, and the small room became a crucible of suffering, heavy with the scent of sickness and the pervasive fear of death. Valancy, confined to the stifling air, watched the bright spark in Cussy's eyes dim day by day, replaced by a glazed, distant look that spoke of a battle Cussy was slowly losing. The ordinary comforts of their meager home offered no solace against this invisible enemy. Each morning brought renewed dread, each night a vigil against the encroaching darkness. Cussy, usually so spry, was reduced to a moaning, restless shadow of herself, her once sharp wit dulled by delirium. It was in this crucible that Valancy Stirling, the timid, overlooked spinster, truly began to forge herself anew. The old Valancy, paralyzed by expectation and fear, vanished. In her place emerged a woman of formidable will and unwavering purpose. Her hands, once prone to trembling, moved with a newfound sureness as she tended to Cussy. She bathed the feverish brow, changed soiled linens with a resolute efficiency, and coaxed sips of water down a parched throat. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. The constant demand of nursing, the sheer physical and emotional drain, would have broken the old Valancy, but this new iteration found strength she never knew she possessed. She fought with a fierce, protective love for the dying woman, ignoring the judgmental whispers of her family, who merely sent condescending advice and kept their distance. Valancy's spirit, long dormant, ignited with a defiant glow, burning brighter with every obstacle, every setback. One desperate afternoon, needing a specific herb rumored to alleviate Cussy's worst symptoms, Valancy found herself at the decrepit, isolated home of Abel Stirling, the family's notorious recluse. The air around Abel's ramshackle dwelling was always thick with mystery and speculation, but Valancy, driven by a singular focus, paid it no mind. As she approached the sagging porch, the door creaked open, and a figure emerged from the dim interior. Not Abel, but a man Valancy recognized instantly, despite having only seen him at a distance. It was Barney Snaith, the enigmatic woodsman, the man whispered about in whispers throughout Deerwood, a figure of dark repute and intriguing mystery. He was tall, with an intense gaze that seemed to miss nothing, and a quiet authority that filled the small clearing. Their eyes met for a brief, charged moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between the nursing woman and the town's most captivating enigma, before Valancy, clutching her basket, continued on her urgent mission into the shadows of Abel's house. Chapter 9, The Outlaw Barney Snaith. In the cloistered judgmental world of Deerwood, no figure loomed larger, nor was more thoroughly demonized than Barney Snaith. He was an enigma, a puzzle the townspeople delighted in solving with the most scandalous and improbable pieces imaginable. The rumors swirled around his isolated dwelling, each more outlandish than the last. He was a criminal, they whispered, a man on the run, perhaps even a murderer fled from distant justice. Others swore he was a masterful counterfeiter, his mysterious wealth a testament to illicit trade. A bank robber, a notorious thief, even an escaped lunatic. Deerwood found it far easier to invent a grand, melodramatic history for Barney Snaith than to accept the simpler truth that some men simply preferred their own company. His very existence in their eyes was an affront, a deliberate act of defiance against their norms, repaid with a constant, simmering animosity fueled by fear and fascination. But Valancy, now a frequent, if secretive, visitor to the fabled Blue Castle, found the reality of Barney Snaith to be a stark, almost comical, contrast to the monstrous figure of Deerwood's collective imagination. The man who shared his quiet evenings and simple meals with her was anything but the hardened criminal or raving madman Deerwood envisioned. He was quiet, yes, almost reticent, yet profoundly attentive. He listened to her with an earnestness no one in her own family had ever afforded her, his gaze steady, his infrequent questions laced with genuine, unpatronizing curiosity. There was a profound respect in his manner, a quiet dignity that belied the wild tales spun about him. He was unfailingly kind, a silent, comforting presence in her new, bewildering world. She saw no menace in his eyes, no flicker of the dangerous outlaw described by Mrs. Frederick. Instead, she found a gentle soul, a man who, like her, seemed to understand the value of quietude and the unspoken comfort found in shared silence. This shared solitude, this mutual understanding of what it meant to be an outsider, became the unlikely bedrock of their burgeoning connection. Valancy, freshly emancipated from the suffocating expectations of her clan, now navigated the choppy waters of her newfound freedom, charting a course separate from Deerwood's social currents. Barney Snaith, a lifelong pariah, had long ago forged his own path, deliberately choosing isolation over grudging societal acceptance. In him, Valancy found not just a confidant, but a kindred spirit. They were two lone stars, orbiting beyond the established constellations, finding in each other a unique and deeply reassuring sense of belonging. Their bond was not yet love, perhaps, but something arguably more fundamental: a recognition, a profound acceptance, and the quiet, exhilarating spark of two souls discovering they were not, after all, quite so alone in the world. Chapter 10. The Proposal. 3.367 Chi, Letter 1 F1 Valancy Stirling, a woman long bound by the invisible chains of her family's stifling expectations and her own quiet timidity, had just received a death sentence that, in a profound and peculiar twist of fate, had set her utterly free. Dr. Trent's pronouncement of a year, perhaps less, owing to a severe heart condition, had shattered the prison walls of her carefully constricted life. All the shoulds and musts of the Stirling clan suddenly dissolved into meaningless dust. She was for the first time gloriously and terrifyingly herself, untethered and emboldened by the very specter of mortality. In this dizzying, rebellious freedom, she found herself walking along the sun-dappled shores of the lake, her spirit alight with a wild, almost reckless energy. There, amidst the whispering pines and the gentle lapping of the water, stood a figure she knew only as Barney Snaith, the rugged, enigmatic lumberjack, a man who lived a solitary existence in the remote reaches of Deerwood. Valancy had observed him from afar, had woven quiet fantasies around his mysterious presence, but now, fueled by her newfound liberation, she saw him with entirely new eyes. He was a symbol of the untamed, the unconventional, everything her life had not been. And then, with an audacious impulse that sprang from the very core of her liberated soul, the words, startling in their directness and their utter lack of preamble, simply tumbled from her lips. "Mr. Snaith," she heard herself say, her voice clear and steady despite the pounding of her heart, "will you marry me?" She saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tensing of his frame. but she pressed on, explaining her incredible, unconventional logic with a desperate earnestness. "You see," she continued, "I'm going to die. Dr. Trent says I have a year, perhaps less, because of my heart. So, I thought, why not? What difference does it make? I've never done anything I wanted to do in my life. I've always been miserable. But now I'm free of them all. And if I'm going to die, I want to live a little first. I want to escape this whole setup. I want to see something, do something, just for myself. And if I'm going to die, I have nothing to lose, do I? So, why shouldn't I marry you?" Her gaze was unwavering, an unspoken challenge in its depths. Barney Snaith, the solitary woodsman, did not scoff, did not laugh. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, and then, after a moment that stretched into an eternity, he spoke. "Very well, Miss Stirling," he said, his voice calm, almost astonishingly so. "I will marry you." His acceptance was as unexpected as her proposal, a quiet affirmation that defied all logic and expectation. And as Valancy stared at him, a shiver ran down her spine. There was a depth in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a knowingness that suggested this man, whom she believed to be a simple lumberjack, harbored secrets, reasons of his own for agreeing to such a bizarre proposition. He had accepted not with passion or protest, but with an unnerving, almost preordained certainty. The die was cast. Valancy Stirling, once bound for a dreary spinsterhood and an early grave, was now bound for an unknown future with a man she barely knew, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Chapter 11. The scandal of the century. The news of Valancy Stirling's engagement to Barney Snaith hit Deerwood like a meteor. For the Stirlings, it was worse than a scandal. It was an extinction-level event. Uncle James's face turned a mottled purple, Aunt Isabel let out a shriek that rattled the teacups, and even Father Wellington, usually so placidly peace, looked as though he'd swallowed a wasp's nest. Arguments raged, pleas were made, threats hurled. Valancy, calm and resolute, stood her ground. There would be a wedding, she stated, and soon. And so there was. No grand procession down the aisle of Deerwood Church. No lace, no flowers, no adoring glances from a proud family. The ceremony was a stark, hurried affair, conducted by a bewildered minister in the cold, uninviting parlor of his manse. Valancy wore her plainest dress, Barney Snaith his usual tweed. There were no guests from her side, only the grim, condemning silence of the Stirling clan echoing in her ears, though they were miles away, washing their hands of her. Her family, true to their word, had already disowned her. Her name, they declared, was to be struck from their ledger, her existence erased from their collective memory. She was no longer a Stirling, they pronounced, but an outcast, a pariah, someone who had deliberately chosen to drag their ancient, respectable name through the mire of scandal. But Valancy, surprisingly, felt no sorrow, only a profound sense of liberation. With the pronouncement of their vows, a quiet, almost defiant peace settled over her. The rings exchanged were simple, the words brief, the act itself a mere formality, yet it sealed her freedom. Immediately afterwards, with not so much as a backward glance at the town that had once been her cage, Valancy stepped into Barney Snaith's waiting car. The air was crisp, the sky a vast, indifferent canvas. The road unwound before them, carrying them away from the narrow, judgmental streets of Deerwood, away from the suffocating expectations, the endless criticism, the dreary, colorless existence she had known for nearly 3 decades. They drove in comfortable silence, the distant murmur of Deerwood fading into the hum of the engine. Then, a short boat ride across the glinting waters of the lake, cutting through the ripples towards the secluded, green sanctuary of Barney's Island. As the boat touched the shore, Valancy felt a strange, thrilling tremor. She was no longer Valancy Stirling, spinster of Deerwood. She was Valancy Snaith, and an entirely new, utterly unpredictable life awaited her beyond the reach of her family's scorn. The scandal had been the price of her escape, and at that moment, it felt remarkably cheap. Chapter 12. Mistawa's the canoe glided over the lake's mirror surface. As they approached, Mistawa's emerged from the horizon, a wild, rugged jewel amidst whispering pines. Craggy shores gave way to dense, dark forests that seemed to share ancient secrets with the gentle lapping of the water. They landed on a small, pebbly cove, the canoe's bow scraping softly against the shore. A narrow path, barely more than a deer trail, beckoned through silver birches and spruce, sunlight dappling moss-covered ground as Valancy followed Barney, her heart thrumming. Then, through a final curtain of firs, it appeared the cabin. Not a grand edifice, nor a rustic shack, but something perfectly poised between the two. It was built of stout, seasoned logs, snugly settled into a clearing overlooking a breathtaking vista of the lake. Its windows, small and numerous, seemed like eyes gazing out, reflecting the deep blue of the sky and the vibrant green of the surrounding trees. A stone chimney rose proudly from one end, promising warmth. Around it, nature held sway. Wild ferns carpeted the ground, wildflowers bloomed in riotous patches, and the air hummed with bees and the distant cry of a loon. It was a haven, crafted by human hands yet utterly belonging to the wilderness. Inside, the cabin was a revelation. It comprised a single large room, impeccably clean and organized, with a sleeping nook partitioned off at one end. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth swept clean. Simple, sturdy furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a comfortable-looking cot filled the space, each piece chosen for utility and quiet charm. The scent of pine and fresh air permeated everything. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden shafts and glinting off the polished surface of a well-worn book lying open on the table. It was sparse, yes, but held an undeniable warmth, a deep, abiding peace that settled instantly into Valancy's soul. Valancy stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. This was not the shimmering, ethereal blue castle of her girlish fantasies, born of books and dreams, constructed of turrets of moonbeam and walls of mist. That castle had been a refuge, a mental escape from the drab reality of her life. But this was real. This cabin, solid and true, built of earth and wood and intention, surrounded by the wild, breathing beauty of the island, was immeasurably better. The blue castle had been a fragile construction, a dream. Mistau's was a life. Here, there was no need for imagined escape. Here, freedom wasn't a conjuration, but the very air she breathed. The simplicity, the quiet, the untamed wilderness, it was all she had ever truly longed for, without quite knowing it. A profound sense of belonging, a deep, resonant peace settled over her, eclipsing the lingering tendrils of her old fears. Her imaginary castle had vanished, not in defeat, but in glorious, utterly satisfying fulfillment. This was home, in a way her childhood house had never been. This was the true blue castle, made manifest. Barney, ever practical, had already begun to unpack their few belongings, arranging things with an efficient, almost silent grace. He indicated the small sleeping nook with a gesture. There was no grand pronouncement, no awkward discussion of boundaries, just a quiet understanding that flowed between them, as natural as the lake breezes. Their initial dynamic was one of courteous company habitation, built on mutual respect for each other's space and an unspoken agreement to share the tasks of this secluded life. Valancy found herself falling into a rhythm, her shyness slowly giving way to a comfortable ease. She learned to fetch water from the spring, to make a simple, nourishing meal over the open fire, to appreciate the quiet communion of sharing a meal without the need for constant conversation. Barney, for his part, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was attentive without being intrusive, protective without being overbearing. He would leave a freshly caught fish by the door, or ensure the woodpile was always stocked, or simply sit on the porch, his presence a steady, comforting anchor. There was an intimacy to their shared existence, born of the close quarters and the solitude, but it was an intimacy wholly devoid of romantic overtone. It was the intimacy of two souls, independent yet interconnected, navigating the quiet waters of life together, each finding their own space within the larger framework of their shared home. They were roommates, companions, two solitaries who had found an unexpected and profound quietude in each other's company. The island, wild and untamed, had brought them together, forging a unique bond that was as sturdy and unpretentious as the log cabin itself. Chapter 13. Housekeeping for the soul. The cabin, once merely a shelter for the recluse Barney Snaith, blossomed under Valancy's touch, not into something grand or opulent, but into a testament to love, care, and the quiet satisfaction of a life chosen. Here, domesticity was not a burden to be endured, but a canvas upon which she painted her burgeoning joy. Each morning, Valancy awoke not to the dread of endless, thankless chores, but to the invigorating prospect of making her home a sanctuary. She cleaned with a fervor born of affection, not obligation. The plain wooden floors, scrubbed until they gleamed with a warm, humble luster, reflected the morning sun like liquid amber. She polished the old furniture, revealing the character of the wood beneath layers of forgotten dust, and arranged the sparse but beloved possessions with an artist's eye. A handful of wild roses, gathered from the sun-drenched clearings, might grace a chipped stoneware jug, their delicate beauty a defiant counterpoint to the cabin's rustic simplicity. A knitted throw, rescued from a forgotten trunk, was draped just so over an armchair, inviting repose. Every cushion fluffed, every curtain adjusted, every hearth swept clean spoke of a woman reclaiming her space, her purpose, and her very soul. This was not the sterile, joyless order demanded by Aunt Stirling, but a living, breathing order, imbued with Valancy's unique spirit. The contrast with the Stirling household could not have been starker. There the house had been a mausoleum of propriety, its heavy velvet draperies suffocating the light, its polished surfaces reflecting only the grim countenances of its inhabitants, its corners perpetually harboring the dust of forgotten dreams. Every task had been a silent battle against an unseen enemy, a duty performed with a sigh and a sense of impending doom. The very air had felt stale, thick with unspoken resentments and the weight of tradition. Here, in the cabin, the air sang with life. Sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows, revealing dancing motes of dust that felt, somehow, cheerful. The scent of pine and fresh, baked bread mingled, a perfume of contentment. The crackle of the fire on the hearth was not just warmth, but a lullaby. This wasn't just a house, it was a home, alive with Valancy's spirit, her choices, her newfound freedom. It was a place where a woman could be herself truly and utterly. And oh, the simple joys. The preparation of a meal became a quiet ritual, not a tedious obligation. Good food, simple but hearty, was a source of profound satisfaction. Valancy would knead bread with strong, willing hands, the scent of yeast a promise of future comfort. She'd simmer stews, her spoon stirring not just ingredients, but love into the pot. To sit down at a modest table, opposite the man she loved, and enjoy the fruits of her labor, knowing it was all hers asterisk, the cooking, the setting, the choosing was a pleasure beyond measure. There was no scrutiny, no criticism, no enforced silence, only the quiet appreciation of shared sustenance. Evenings by the firelight were particularly precious. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, transforming the small space into a haven of warmth and intimacy. The world outside, with its expectations and its clamor, faded into insignificance. Here, in the gentle glow, Valancy could read, she could knit, she could simply be, wrapped in the profound peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. This autonomy, this unburdened freedom to arrange her own days, to choose her own tasks, to find beauty in the small acts of creation and upkeep, was the true housekeeping for her soul. It was a daily reaffirmation that joy, indeed, can be found not in grand adventures, but in the quiet, purposeful act of building a life, stitch by stitch, crumb by crumb, with love as its foundation. Chapter 14. The cats and the car. Valancy's days in the little house were punctuated by small, surprising delights. Among these were the resident felines, Good Luck and Banjo, who had adopted Barney Snaith and now extended their casual ownership to her. Good Luck, a magnificent cream-colored Persian with emerald eyes, moved with aristocratic grace, demanding reverence. Banjo, his polar opposite, was a scruffy, black alley cat, all angles and mischief, with a perpetually battered ear and an impudent tail. He was a creature of playful rebellion, always ready for a pounce or a chase. Valancy, accustomed only to stern farm cats, found herself utterly charmed. These were companions, personalities, sources of endless amusement. Their independent spirits, their purring contentment, offered a warmth and simple joy she hadn't known. Observing their rituals, their sleepy stretches in sunbeams, brought a lightness, a subtle whimsy woven into her new life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Barney suggested a drive. The invitation sent a thrill through Valancy. She had never imagined riding in an automobile, much less Barney's gray Slauson. It was a sturdy, powerful machine humming with latent energy. As Barney started the engine, the world transformed. The rumble vibrated through the floorboards, a thrilling alien sensation. They left the quiet lane, turning onto the winding country road. At first, Valancy clutched the seat, her heart a frantic drum. The speed felt immense, terrifying. Trees became blurred streaks, fences a dizzying succession. The wind tore at her hair, whipping strands across her face, carrying away the cobwebs of her old life. She tasted the air, sharp and exhilaratingly cold. Then, slowly, the fear receded. In its place surged something new, electrifying, an adrenaline rush, pure and potent. She leaned into the turns, feeling the vehicle's sway, its sheer power. The world rushed past, not as a threat, but as an unfolding tapestry, vibrant and alive. The gray Slauson was a magic carpet, carrying her from the confines of her past into a glorious future. The wind roared past her ears, an anthem of liberation. Her laughter, light and free, spilled out into the afternoon, mingling with the engine's roar. She felt utterly alive, untethered, wonderfully free. The speed was intoxicating, a revelation. Every mile was a declaration, every gust of wind a whisper of possibility. She understood in that moment what it meant to soar. Chapter 15. The magic of John Foster Valancy Stirling had always found solace in words, but none had spoken to her soul quite like those penned by the enigmatic John Foster. In the barren landscape of her former life, his nature books had been an oasis, a secret garden where her spirit could roam free. Now, in the sun-drenched freedom of her little cabin, with Barney Snaith by her side, it felt only natural to share this treasured part of herself. She spoke of Foster often, her voice alight with an almost reverent devotion, her eyes shining as she recounted passages that had resonated deeply within her. "Oh, Barney," she would exclaim, looking up from a worn copy, he writes, "the heart must wander a little sometimes, or it dies. Isn't that perfectly true? I felt that so acutely, shut away in my little room at Deerwood, longing for something more." Barney, always relaxed in his chair by the fire or whittling a piece of wood, would offer a quiet hum, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was a strange smile, Valancy noticed, one that seemed to hold a vast, secret amusement. Another time she'd read aloud, "There is a hidden beauty in every withered leaf, a silent song in every forgotten corner of the forest." She'd pause, seeking his agreement. "He understands the magic of the unseen. Barney, he doesn't just describe nature, he reveals its very heart." Barney would lean back, his eyes twinkling as if privy to some delightful private joke. He never contradicted her, never scoffed at her earnest admiration. Instead, his reactions were a peculiar blend of quiet attention and an almost knowing indulgence. He listened to her impassioned recitations with an air of one who understands exactly what she means. Perhaps even more than she does. He would sometimes finish a sentence she'd begun, or nod sagely at a particularly obscure reference, as if it were a common saying. "Ah, yes," he might murmur, "the wind-blown pines singing their ancient lullaby." Foster had a keen ear for that. Valancy, caught up in her enthusiasm, would scarcely notice the subtle shift, the peculiar ease with which he seemed to inhabit the very world Foster described. Yet for the careful listener, and slowly, very slowly, for Valancy herself, a faint, intriguing dissonance began to emerge. Why was Barney so perfectly, uncannily aligned with every sentiment, every observation of this reclusive writer? Why did his amusement, however gentle, seem to hint at a deeper, more personal connection than that of a mere reader? The magic of John Foster's words was undeniable, but the magic of Barney's quiet, amused reactions hinted at an even greater mystery, one that was slowly, delightfully, beginning to unravel. Chapter 16. A winter's tale. The world outside Barney Snaith's little cabin underwent a profound transformation as winter gripped Muskoka, blanketing the forest in silent, pristine snow. Inside, a quiet revolution unfolded. The early, tentative comfort between Valancy and Barney deepened into something richer, warmer, and infinitely more precious. Their evenings became a sacred ritual. The roar of the fire in the hearth was their constant companion, casting flickering shadows that danced with their thoughts. They would talk for hours, not in the polite, superficial manner Valancy had known her entire life, but with a profound openness she had never dared to dream of. Barney spoke of his wanderings, his observations, his musings on philosophy and art. To her astonishment, Valancy found herself not just listening, but contributing, her mind ignited by his words. She shared her long-suppressed thoughts, her secret dreams, the books she loved, the beauty she yearned for. No judgment, no condescension, just genuine interest and a stimulating exchange of ideas. He treated her not as the meek Valancy her family knew, but as an intelligent, perceptive woman whose opinions held weight. He listened with an intensity that made her feel her words truly mattered, drawing out nuances she hadn't realized she possessed. He challenged her viewpoints gently, not to diminish, but to explore them more deeply, inviting her to debate and discover alongside him. This intellectual equality was a revelation. For the first time, Valancy felt seen, truly heard, and valued for the landscape of her mind. When conversation waned, they would read, sometimes aloud, taking turns with a favorite passage, sometimes silently, side by side, each lost in their own world but profoundly aware of the other's presence. The quiet companionship was a balm to her soul. In these shared silences, these moments of simply existing together, the fire's crackle, a turning page, the comfortable weight of shared air, the truest magic unfolded. And in the gentle unfolding of those winter nights, Valancy found herself facing an undeniable truth. The rebellious defiance that had driven her into this marriage faded, replaced by something infinitely more tender and profound. She had married Barney Snaith, a man she barely knew, believing her life was almost over. Now, paradoxically, she felt more alive than ever before. Her heart, which she believed was failing, swelled with a warmth and vibrancy utterly new. She loved him. The realization stole over her like the silent snowfall outside, quiet and inexorable. She loved his quiet strength, his unconventional mind, his deep kindness, his piercing gaze. She loved the comfortable rhythm of their days, the way he looked at her, the ease of their communication. This love was not the whimsical, storybook romance she'd imagined for her blue castle, but something far deeper, rooted in mutual respect, shared understanding, and a profound sense of belonging. It had grown, organically and irrevocably, from the fertile ground of their unlikely companionship. With that love came a fresh wave of fear. She had found her heart's true home, only to be reminded she believed it destined to be short-lived. The joy of her discovery was inextricably woven with the bittersweet thread of her impending loss. But for now, in the comforting cocoon of the cabin, surrounded by the silent, steadfast forest, Valancy allowed herself to simply be in its wonder, her blue castle finally found, her heart irrevocably given. Chapter 17. The Shadow of Death. Valancy's new life, forged in the wild beauty of the forest and anchored by Barney's quiet strength, ought to have been a tapestry woven entirely of joy. And in many ways it was. She had found her freedom, her voice, and a love deeper and more profound than any dream she had ever dared to whisper. Yet a shadow, long and cold, stretched across the brightest moments, dimming their brilliance. The medical diagnosis, the pronouncement of a heart that would betray her, remained an unshakable truth, a stark deadline looming over every shared laugh, every tender glance. Each sunrise over the lake, painting the sky with hues of hope, was simultaneously a reminder that another day had slipped through her grasp. She began, almost unconsciously, to count them, not in weeks or months, but in the finite, precious days she believed were allotted to her. A silent, terrifying calendar ticked away in the chambers of her own heart, marking off the irreplaceable moments. Every shared meal, every walk along the murmuring shore, every quiet evening spent by the hearth, was savored with a fierce, almost desperate intensity, knowing that its memory would soon be all that remained. Her greatest resolve, however, was to protect Barney from the chilling knowledge that haunted her. He must not know. His memories of her, she vowed, would be untainted by sorrow or the specter of impending loss. She would be for him, always, the vibrant, joyful woman he had chosen, not a fragile being fading away. So she practiced a relentless alchemy, transforming her fear into laughter, her despair into devotion. Her smiles were brighter, her enthusiasm more infectious, a meticulously constructed facade designed to ensure he never glimpsed the frantic countdown playing out behind her eyes. It was an exhausting performance, a constant battle waged in the quiet corners of her mind, yet one she undertook with unwavering commitment. This love, this magnificent, unexpected love for Barney, became the most exquisite torment. To finally find such a deep connection, a soulmate in the truest sense, only to believe she must leave it behind, was a cruelty beyond measure. Her heart, purportedly failing, swelled with an overwhelming capacity for affection, making the thought of separation unbearable. She clung to him, not with desperation, but with a profound, aching tenderness, imbuing every touch, every word, with the weight of 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. It was a love that tasted of honey and salt, sweet in its presence, bitter in its inevitable anticipated absence. Valancy lived suspended between the radiant joy of her present and the crushing certainty of her solitary future, loving him fiercely, knowing that each cherished moment brought her closer to a farewell she could neither speak nor truly comprehend. Chapter 18. The train incident. The late afternoon sun cast long, lazy shadows as Valancy and Barney walked the familiar stretch of railway line, a quiet ritual they had come to cherish. The rhythmic crunch of gravel underfoot, the steel rails gleaming endlessly into the distance, it was a world apart from the demands and expectations of their daily lives. Barney, ever the free spirit, was lost in thought, perhaps composing a poem or simply enjoying the vastness of the moment. Valancy, however, possessed a quieter alertness, her eyes often scanning their surroundings, a habit born of a lifetime of observation. It was this very alertness that saved them. A low rumble, almost imperceptible at first, grew with terrifying speed. Barney, engrossed, seemed not to hear it, or perhaps dismissed it as a distant sound. But Valancy knew better. Her gaze darted to the approaching train, a dark behemoth gathering momentum around the bend. Her heart leaped into her throat, a cold dread seizing her. "Barney!" she cried, her voice a thin thread against the rising roar. He turned, startled, his eyes widening as he finally registered the approaching locomotive, now alarmingly close. But even as he tried to move, he stumbled. His shoelace, carelessly untied, had snagged on a track tie, trapping his foot with cruel precision. Panic flared in his eyes. The ground vibrated. The air thrummed with the train's colossal power. There was no time to think, only to act. In that heart-stopping instant, Valancy, usually so reserved, became a force of nature. Without a shred of hesitation, without a thought for her own safety, she flung herself towards him. Her fingers, trembling yet decisive, tore at the stubborn knot, the very fabric of the shoelace yielding under her desperate strength. She gave a mighty yank, pulling him free just as the train thundered past, a deafening blur of steel and wind, its whistle a screaming cry in their ears. They tumbled to the ground, a tangled heap of limbs, the train's terrifying rush of air buffeting them, its shadow engulfing them for a terrifying second before it sped on, leaving behind only the fading roar and the ringing silence. Barney lay there, chest heaving, his face pale and etched with shock. He had stared death in the face, and in that horrifying moment, Valancy had been his shield. He looked at her then, truly looked at her. Gone was the quiet, unassuming woman he had married out of mutual convenience. Here was a woman of fierce courage, of selfless love, whose quick thinking and bravery had saved his life. The fear that had gripped him now transmuted into an overwhelming wave of gratitude, followed by a revelation that shook him to his core. He hadn't just married a companion, he had married a hero. And more than that, he had married a woman he was, unequivocally, falling deeply in love with. The easy camaraderie, the comfortable silences, the shared dreams of their small, unconventional world, these had been the building blocks of their relationship. But this moment of raw, visceral danger and her extraordinary courage had cemented it into something far more profound. The foundations of a true, passionate romance had been laid, not in declarations or grand gestures, but in the frantic tearing of a shoelace and the defiant spirit of a woman who risked everything. Their marriage of convenience had just found its heart. Chapter 19. The twist revealed Valancy Stirling, with a heart heavy with a familiar dread, once again found herself ascending the familiar steps to Dr. Trent's office. The summons had come unexpectedly, a terse note requesting her presence, and though she told herself it was likely just a follow-up, a part of her soul braced for another grim pronouncement. Perhaps her time was even shorter than originally predicted. She felt a strange detachment now, a quiet resolve that had blossomed from the very seed of her supposed demise. But still, the old anxiety, a ghost of her former self, gnawed at the edges of her newfound peace. Dr. Trent met her with an expression she had never seen on his usually composed features, a mixture of acute embarrassment and something akin to profound relief, tinged with a nervous energy that was entirely out of character. He motioned her to a chair, his usual briskness replaced by a hesitant courtesy. He fumbled with papers on his desk, clearing his throat several times before looking up at her, his gaze unwavering but apologetic. "Miss Stirling," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, "I have made a discovery. A most extraordinary and, I must confess, inexcusable error has come to light." Valancy's breath caught. She braced herself. This was it then, worse news. He continued, picking up two envelopes, identical in appearance. "It appears there was a mix-up, a clerical mix-up of the most unfortunate kind. 2 patients, names somewhat similar, reports returned on the same day. Your report was placed in another patient's file, and theirs was placed in yours." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to the edifice of her carefully constructed new life. She could only stare, a dawning comprehension slowly, terrifyingly, seizing her mind. Dr. Trent held out a sheet of paper. "This, Miss Stirling, is your actual report. It arrived only yesterday, returned from a specialist who had been on leave. Your initial report, the one I gave you, was not yours. It described a severe, terminal cardiac condition. This one," he tapped the paper with a trembling finger, "describes a completely healthy, perfectly sound heart. No trace of any ailment. You are, Miss Stirling, in perfect health. There is nothing wrong with you. You were never dying." The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but a void into which Valancy's entire world was crumbling. He expected relief, no doubt, joy, tears of gratitude. But what rose within her was not joy, not even shock in its purest form. It was a cold, spreading horror. Perfect health. She was perfectly healthy. She was not dying. The words, meant to be a reprieve, landed like a death sentence of a different, more excruciating kind. Her mind reeled, a torrent of images, her defiance of the Stirlings, her furious farewell to Deerwood, her escape, her marriage to Barney Snaith, the freedom, the reckless joy, the love she had found, all predicated on the certainty of a swift exit from life. Now, she had to *live*. She had to live with the consequences of every brave, defiant, desperate choice she had made under the illusion of impending death. The bridges she had burned, the ties she had severed, the scandalous independence she had embraced, all for naught, for a mistake. The weight of her perfect health was suddenly unbearable. She hadn't been given a second chance, she had been robbed of the very premise that had allowed her to live truly for the first time. The sheer, terrifying longevity stretched before her, an eternity in which she would have to face the fallout of her rebellion, without the comforting certainty of a swift and certain end. She was healthy, and it was the most horrifying news she had ever received. Chapter 20. The flight. The letter from Dr. Trent shattered Valancy's world. Tucked innocently on Barney's desk, its words were a blade. Dr. Trent, addressing Barney, detailed Valancy's supposed prognosis, last few months of life, and her family's desperate hope for her to experience some fleeting happiness. A cold dread seeped in, not fear of death, long faded, but the crushing humiliation of a love built on grotesque deception. Her beloved Barney hadn't married her for love. It was pity, a noble obligation to a dying woman, offering a beautiful, comforting lie because he believed her days were numbered. The cruelest irony, she wasn't dying. She was vibrant, alive, filled with a zest for life discovered only with him. This knowledge, once exhilarating, now became a weapon against her. She had trapped him, ensnared in a prison of compassionate duty, the man she adored. The thought was unbearable. There was only one path: she had to set him free. Her selfless love demanded this sacrifice. She would vanish, leaving no trace or explanation, allowing him to resume his unfettered existence. He must never know she read the letter, or that her illness was a fabrication. He must simply awaken to find his burden lifted, his charade concluded. Mysteries, once vibrant with their joy, now choked her with sorrow. With a leaden heart, she began to pack, her movements deliberate, each item a fragment of a dissolving dream. The cushion he admired, the book they read, the simple dress, each brought a fresh wave of desolate grief. She touched her wedding ring, a symbol of a love she now understood as a cruel illusion, and slipped it off, placing it carefully on the dresser. Her gaze swept the familiar room, absorbing every detail: the sunlit window, the rough-hewn beams. Each memory a beautiful, painful ghost. This beloved home, this haven, she must leave forever. She walked to the window, the lake a shimmering sapphire, mocking her with its beauty. She had found heaven here, only to discover it was built on sand. Barney was gone. He had ridden out early, as was his custom. His absence, once welcome, now became a heavy cloak of loneliness and a terrifying freedom. It meant she could escape unhindered, but also meant no final embrace, no last glimpse, no chance for a different truth. Her flight would be silent, solitary, and absolute. The thought of him returning to an empty house, to the silent reproach of her vanished presence, twisted her heart with a final, unbearable pang. Yet, she pressed on, for she loved him too much to condemn him to a life of pity. Chapter 21. The millionaire's son. The quiet life Valancy had built with Barney in the little house in the woods was a sanctuary, a world apart from the strictures of Deerwood. She had found a peace she never imagined, a love that transcended the ordinary. But as with all tranquil waters, sometimes a stone is cast, sending ripples that redefine the entire surface. One crisp autumn afternoon, a stranger arrived at their door, disrupting the familiar rhythm of their days. He was a man of dignified bearing, a well-dressed physician, who looked utterly out of place amidst the rustic simplicity of the little forest home. His gaze, however, was not on Valancy, but seemed to search beyond her, into the very heart of the cottage. "Excuse me," the visitor began, his voice polite but firm. "I am Dr. Trent. I believe a Mr. Snaith resides here." Valancy's heart gave a lurch. Snaith, it was Barney's last name, of course, but the way the doctor said it, with an air of expectation and familiarity, was unsettling. "Yes," she managed, "my husband, Barney Snaith." Dr. Trent's expression softened slightly, then hardened with purpose. "I have urgent news for him. His father, Mr. Snaith, of the Snaith Patent Medicine Company, is gravely ill. He has sent me to find his son." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Valancy felt a cold shiver trace down her spine. Snaith Patent Medicine Company, the wealthiest man in Canada, the legendary medicine magnate. Barney, her Barn the Wanderer, quiet, almost reclusive artist, was the son of Snaith. It was utterly preposterous. Yet the doctor's earnest, unyielding gaze offered no room for doubt. Dr. Trent continued, oblivious to Valancy's spiraling disbelief. "He has been greatly missed, particularly by his father, and by a great many admirers of his work as well, I might add. It has been quite a search, Mr. Foster." The name, Mr. Foster, landed like a thunderclap. Valancy's breath hitched. "Foster? But wait, there was only one Foster the Doctor could possibly mean, given the context of admirers of his work. The acclaimed, reclusive author, John Foster, whose novels she adored, whose profound words had often spoken to her soul. Her mind reeled, trying to connect the dots, to reconcile the familiar, unassuming face of her husband with the grand, almost mythical figure of John Foster. It was impossible, wasn't it? A wild, fantastic dream. But then the doctor, seeing her bewildered expression, offered a small, knowing smile. Yes, Mrs. Snaith, or perhaps I should say Mrs. Foster, your husband, Barney Snaith, is indeed John Foster, the famous author. He has been living under an assumed identity here, seeking a peace he evidently found with you. Valancy could only stare, the world around her tilting on its axis. The simple life, the simple man she had loved, dissolved before her eyes, replaced by a dazzling, intricate tapestry woven with threads of immense wealth and profound literary fame. Barney, the man who lived in a small house, who had nothing but his books and his art, was the son of a millionaire and a celebrated genius. The revelation was not just a fact, it was an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of her understanding, not just of Barney, but of her own reality. Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed, was suddenly challenged, reshaped, and utterly transformed. Her quiet, ordinary life had, in the span of a few shocking minutes, become a fairy tale. Chapter 22. The reconciliation. The quiet of the forest, which had once been Valancy's solace, now seemed to mock the turmoil in her heart. She walked, unseeing, until the sound of footsteps, hesitant yet determined, brought her to a standstill. It was Barney, his face etched with a profound regret she had never witnessed before. Valancy, he began, his voice a low rumble, carrying the weight of his hidden world. I know this is a shock. I know I have no right to ask for your understanding. But please let me explain. He found her gaze, wounded yet unwavering, and continued, slowly, deliberately, as if trying to untangle a complex knot of truths. My life before you was a gilded cage. Everyone saw the name, the wealth, the expectations, never the man beneath it. I longed for a corner of the world where I could simply be asterisk, where my worth wasn't measured by a ledger. I wanted to disappear, to find out if anything real could exist for me. When I came to Deerwood, posing as Barney Snaith, a man without prospects, a drifter, it was a desperate gamble. I needed to know if I could forge a life, a connection, based purely on myself, unburdened by the absurdity of my true identity. And then I met you. You, Valancy Stirling, who saw past the shabby clothes and the assumed name. You, who believed in a man everyone else dismissed as a ne'er-do-well. You gave me dignity, a purpose I hadn't known I craved. His eyes, usually so guarded, were now wide open, vulnerable. I watched you, Valancy. I saw your quiet rebellion against the crushing dullness of your life, your defiant spirit hidden beneath that meek exterior. I saw the fire in you, the dreams, the courage to seize a chance however desperate, to claim your own happiness. You were brave, Valancy, so incredibly brave, to marry a man like Barney Snaith, to defend him, to love him. It was that bravery, that fierce, untamed spirit, that drew me in, that made me fall irrevocably, utterly, in love with you. A breath hitched in Valancy's throat as the words settled, a torrent of emotion washing over her. The hurt of the deception still lingered, but it was now mingled with an overwhelming tide of understanding, and a profound, aching love for the man standing before her. Barney, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I loved Barney Snaith. The man who saw the beauty in the ordinary, who understood me without words. He took a step closer, reaching out a hand, then letting it fall, respecting the fragile space between them. And that man, Valancy, that's who I am. The wealth, the name, they are merely trappings. They don't change the heart I've given to you, or the life we've built. That life, our life, it has been the most real, the most precious thing I've ever known. The world seemed to shrink around them, nothing existing but their raw, exposed feelings. The thought of losing this connection, of returning to their separate, unshared lives, felt like an unbearable weight. The Blue Castle, their sanctuary, suddenly seemed hollow without their entwined destinies. A silent, mutual understanding passed between them, a recognition that the truth, however jarring, could not diminish the profound bond they had forged. I don't want to leave you, Valancy confessed, the words tumbling out, echoing the silent plea in his eyes. And I, Barney replied, his voice thick with emotion, I cannot imagine a single day without you, Valancy. The deception had fractured their reality, but in its wake, an unbreakable truth had emerged. Their love, born in disguise, was undeniably, fiercely, real. And neither of them, not for all the castles or fortunes in the world, wanted to let it go. Chapter 23. The real Blue Castle. The revelation hung in the air, not as a shock to shatter their fragile happiness, but as a surprising, almost amusing footnote to the profound love Valancy and Barney had discovered. The truth, once known, simply deepened the roots of their affection. Barney Snaith, the supposed woodsman, the black sheep, was in fact Bartholomew Snaith, the millionaire industrialist, the man who owned Glenwood, who owned much more than Valancy could ever have imagined. But for Valancy, it scarcely mattered. She had fallen in love with a man, not a fortune, and that man remained, unchanged in his heart, his spirit, his quiet strength. Their future, once so clear in its simplicity, now shimmered with possibilities. They spoke of travel, of seeing the world that had previously existed only in Valancy's wistful daydreams. Paris, London, the sun-drenched coasts of Italy, all were now within their grasp. Yet, amidst the allure of distant lands, they made a solemn pact. Mistawis, their cabin, their sanctuary in the wild, would remain their true home. It was there, stripped of pretense and societal demands, that they had truly found each other. It was there that their blue castle had materialized, not in the clouds, but in the sturdy logs and the shared silence of the forest. They would adventure, yes, but always, they would return to the quiet haven that had witnessed the blooming of their impossible love. Meanwhile, back in Deerwood, the news of Valancy's extraordinary turn of fortune hit the Stirling family like a thunderclap in a clear sky. Their carefully constructed world of judgment and condescension crumbled into bewildered awe. The same Valancy they had dismissed as plain, peculiar, and ultimately doomed to a life of spinsterhood or a regrettable marriage to a ne'er-do-well woodsman, was now revealed to be married to a millionaire. Bartholomew Snaith, the heir to Glenwood, the very epitome of the wealth and social standing they so desperately coveted. Their initial horror at her scandalous marriage to Barney Snaith morphed into a dizzying blend of shock, envy, and a frantic scramble to reconcile their past pronouncements with this astonishing reality. What had they said about Valancy's poor choices? About her lack of prospects? The irony was as rich and bitter as a plum cake for them, as they grappled with the undeniable fact that the girl they had pitied and scorned had, in their eyes, won the grandest prize of all. For Valancy herself, the transition from dreaming to living was complete. Her blue castle, that ethereal realm of quiet rebellion and secret joy, had not merely been found, it had been built brick by glorious brick, by her own courageous choices. The reality she now inhabited with Barney, a reality overflowing with love, freedom, respect, and yes, even unexpected wealth, was infinitely grander, more vibrant, and more satisfying than any fantasy she had ever woven within the confines of her attic room. Her dreams, once delicate wisps against the backdrop of a dreary existence, had not merely come true, they had been surpassed. The blue castle of her imagination was beautiful, yes, but the real blue castle she shared with Barney, rooted in genuine affection and mutual understanding, standing firm and bright against the very sky, was a masterpiece beyond all imagining. She had not only escaped her prison, she had found her kingdom, and ruled it with a heart finally, truly, gloriously free. Welcome, dear listener, to the final, most transformative chapter of our journey into the world of Valancy Stirling. We've witnessed her quiet desperation, her sudden rebellion, and her ultimate blossoming into the vibrant woman she was always meant to be. Now, it's your turn. It's time to move beyond observation and step directly into the life you've been dreaming of, to build and inhabit your very own blue castle. This isn't about waiting for a sudden revelation or an external catalyst. This is about deliberate, courageous action. Over the next 7 days, we will embark on a practical guide to applying the profound philosophy gleaned from Valancy's story, a path designed to awaken your truest self. Let us begin. Ask Day 1 and 2. Audit your fears. Remember Valancy, trapped not just by her family, but by the myriad unspoken anxieties that held her captive. Her dreams and desires were imprisoned by a web of what-ifs and I can't. Your first step, much like hers, is to identify those invisible chains. For the next 2 days, I invite you to embark on a fearless audit. Find a quiet corner, grab a pen and paper, and simply write. What are your deepest fears? What whispers in the back of your mind, telling you no before you've even tried? List every constraint, every hesitation, every I can't that comes to mind. Don't judge them, just acknowledge them. See them for what they are, not insurmountable walls, but thoughts that can be confronted. Give them form, and in doing so, you begin to diminish their power. Ask Day 3 and 4. The no-challenge duck. Valancy, after her life-altering diagnosis, found an unexpected surge of courage. She began to say no, not with malice, but with a quiet, firm assertion of her own desires, refusing to be dictated by others' expectations or self-imposed obligations. Now it's your turn for the no challenge. Over the next 2 days, identify one obligation in your life, just one, that you absolutely dread. Perhaps it's a social engagement you feel pressured to attend, a task you've taken on out of guilt, or a routine demand that saps your energy without offering anything in return. Then, respectfully but firmly, say no. Experience the small rebellion, the quiet reclaiming of your time and your spirit. Feel the liberation that comes from honoring your own boundaries. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but the freedom it brings is immense. Day 5 and 6. Find your mistawi's dust. Every soul needs its sanctuary, a place where the clamor of the world fades, and the authentic self can emerge. For Valancy, this was Mistawi's, her blue castle, a haven of wild beauty and solitude. For the next 2 days, your mission is to find your own Mistawi's. It might be a sun-dappled forest, a peaceful park bench, a quiet corner of your garden, or even a cherished library nook. The key is solitude, a communion with nature if possible, and silence. Let your mind wander. Let your spirit breathe. Allow yourself to simply be in a space that offers comfort and inspiration, away from the demands and judgments of others. This is where your truest self begins to unfurl, just as Valancy's did, strengthened and renewed. Day 7. Do one thing you would do if you had a year to live. And now, the grand culmination. Having confronted your fears, reclaimed your time, and found your inner peace, what will you do with this newfound freedom? Today, I challenge you to do one thing, just one, that you would pursue if you knew you had but a year left to live. Valancy's transformation wasn't about grand gestures. It was about living authentically, about embracing love and freedom when she believed her time was short. Is it starting that novel, learning that instrument, telling someone how you truly feel, taking that long-dreamed-of walk? This isn't about quitting your job or selling everything. It's about a single meaningful act that aligns with your deepest desires, a step that whispers, "This is me." Let this act be a promise to yourself, a tangible step into the life you are truly meant to live, a life built within your very own blue castle. This 7-day plan is merely a beginning, a gentle push toward a life of genuine self-expression. The journey to your blue castle is a lifelong adventure, filled with choices, courage, and boundless possibility. Embrace it, live it. Make it uniquely, gloriously yours. Having journeyed alongside Valancy Stirling through the surprising twists and tender revelations of the Blue Castle, we find ourselves reflecting on the profound wisdom tucked within its enchanting narrative. This story, vibrant with the bloom of late-in-life discovery, distills its essence into 3 unforgettable truths that resonate far beyond the shores of Muskoka Lake. Our first profound takeaway is this: fear is the only thing that makes life small. For nearly 3 decades, Valancy existed within a tiny, carefully constructed prison of anxieties. Fear of her family's judgment, fear of societal disapproval, fear of being the perpetually overlooked spinster. These were the unseen walls that suffocated her spirit. Her very existence was dictated by the dread of displeasing others, leading her to suppress her true thoughts, her vibrant imagination, and her deep capacity for love. It was only when confronted with the terrifying prospect of her own mortality that the grip of fear finally loosened. In that pivotal moment, the fear of death eclipsed all other, pettier fears, ironically liberating her to live authentically for the very first time. By shedding her anxieties, Valancy didn't just grow, she exploded into a life of unexpected joy and profound self-expression, demonstrating that the only true limitation is the one we allow fear to impose upon us. Secondly, the Blue Castle beautifully illustrates that nature is a healing force that clarifies perspective. Valancy, even in her meekest days, found solace in the wild beauty of her inner blue castle of dreams and imagination. But it was in the physical wilderness, amidst the pines and the quiet solitude of the lake, that she truly began to heal and find herself. The natural world, unburdened by human artifice and societal expectations, offered a sanctuary where her spirit could breathe. The forest, the water, the open sky, these became her mirrors, reflecting back a strength and authenticity she hadn't known she possessed. Away from the suffocating judgment of her family, nature stripped away the pretense and allowed her true self to emerge, whole and clear-eyed. It provided not just a refuge, but a crucible for transformation, proving that reconnecting with the wild can be the most potent medicine for the soul. Finally, and perhaps most inspiringly, the novel declares that it is never too late to start your life over. Valancy Stirling was 29, a seemingly hopeless spinster, trapped in a life of dreary domesticity with no prospects for happiness. Her peers were settled, her future appeared bleak and immutable. Yet, her courageous decision to defy expectations, spurred by a misinterpreted diagnosis, propelled her into an entirely new existence. She found love, purpose, and independence in the most unexpected places, and at an age when many believe their story is already written. Her journey is a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal, no matter how dire the past or how advanced the years. It reminds us that every day is an opportunity for a fresh beginning, that courage can bloom at any age, and that the greatest adventures often begin precisely when we dare to believe that our story is far from over. These three takeaways, the freedom found in overcoming fear, the clarity offered by nature, and the perpetual possibility of new beginnings, are the enduring gifts of the Blue Castle, inviting us all to embrace a life lived with courage, authenticity, and boundless hope. And so, our journey with Valancy Stirling, from the gray confines of her family home to the vibrant freedom of her own making, draws to a close. Her story is a testament to the power of courage, the quiet strength of a loving heart, and the unwavering belief in one's own happiness. We've witnessed her transformation, her blossoming, her defiant embrace of life on her own terms, discovering that true freedom lies not in escape, but in authenticity. But dear listener, while we've tried to capture the essence of her remarkable adventure and the heart of L.M. Montgomery's genius, no abridged telling can ever truly convey the full, enchanting tapestry of the original prose. To fully immerse yourself in the shimmering descriptions of Valancy's beloved Muskoka, to feel the nuanced emotions of her awakening heart, and to savor the delightful wit and wisdom woven into every sentence, I implore you to pick up the complete novel. Experience the exquisite detail, the lyrical language, and the profound beauty that only Montgomery herself can deliver. It is a treasure meant to be held, read, and reread, allowing her words to truly sing in your imagination. Valancy found her Blue Castle not as a mythical place, but as a state of being, a life built on authenticity and love, a haven where her spirit could truly soar. It was her dream made real, and that leads me to ask you, our cherished audience, a deeply personal question. What is your Blue Castle? What are those unspoken dreams, those secret longings, that perfect vision of happiness you hold dear within your heart? Perhaps it's a tranquil retreat, a passionate pursuit, a profound connection, or a life lived on your own terms, just like Valancy. Share your thoughts, your aspirations, your own Blue Castle in the comments section below. Let's create a space where we can celebrate these inner worlds together. If this journey with Valancy has resonated with you, if you found inspiration in her courage, or simply delight in her story, please consider giving this episode a like. Your appreciation truly fuels our passion for bringing these literary masterpieces to life. And if you wish to embark on more such captivating literary journeys, delving into the hearts and minds of unforgettable characters and exploring the timeless themes of great literature, then do subscribe to our channel. Join our growing community of fellow book lovers, and let's continue to discover the magic hidden within the pages of extraordinary tales, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and until our next adventure, may your own Blue Castle shine brightly.